Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. And we are moving on from a very interesting session before us that was set in the same period as our discussion, the 19th century, talking about two incredible women that really broke boundaries during that time. And we're moving on to a talk that describes the same period and its vibrancy through the fascinating characters that lived in Calcutta, in Bengal, in their time. So Sreemati Mukherjee, on my left, will be talking about four incredible women that broke a lot of social norms and boundaries during this period. And Devasis, to my right, will be sharing some very interesting stories about men, mainly, all, I think, European and American, who found their way to this vibrant city and were involved in all sorts of areas that people wouldn't even imagine were happening at the time. So just to set the scene, I'm a science teacher by profession, not a Bengali. Ended up in the city almost 3 decades ago and fell in love with history simply because it was so vibrant. Every building, every person I met on the street, every picture I looked at on their walls reminded me of something that I had to dig deeper into. And I discovered the richness of the 19th century through reading and conversations. And I'm very, very inspired by these two books. I really enjoyed reading them because they uncovered another level of this, this detail and the mystery that is often misunderstood and often discussed with different perspectives and inspiration by many. So as you know, there was a very diverse population that lived in 19th century Bengal. Some of them were confined to what was known as the White Town or the colonial part of the city that we are in right now. And of course, there was the whole Bajralog community and the rest of their community in the black or the native town. And in between, we had a grey town that was populated by Jews and Armenians and Chinese and Anglo-Indians and also non-Bengalis, Bengalis who came from other parts of India, as far as Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh and also Bihar and Jharkhand, which are, of course, were part of Bengal at that time. So I'm going to start by asking Sreemati to talk a little bit about her own personal journey that inspired her to write this. She's a very erudite scholar from Presidency University, and she's written this beautifully penned book about women and the romance of their world, because education, of course, was such a contentious topic in the 19th century. Women were not educated, and there were a lot of norms that were broken. Interestingly enough, although within Bengali society, a lot of this was debated and talked about, and it sort of marinated through the 19th century, there was never, there wasn't actually a huge change until probably the end of the century. And the Renaissance can almost be defined as when Raja Ram Mohan Roy was horrified by the fact that his brother's wife committed sati in 1821, leading all the way up to the end of Rabindranath Tagore's life, when things had progressed to a certain degree. So, Sreemati, I invite you to talk about your journey and what inspired you to talk about these four incredible women at their time.
Thank you, Husna, and good evening to everyone here. It's wonderful to see you on this, let's say, late afternoon, cold winter day. Well, I would say, I've been responding to Husna's question, that my journey, more or less, because I worked with African American and African women writers for my PhD, but to arrive at the 19th century, it was a long journey, and part of it has to do with my interest in Sri Ramakrishna. My journey vis-a-vis this book would begin with my own location, because you see, when one locates a person, one has to look at race, class, gender, and historical context. So I was about 47 at that time, in 2008, and I was teaching English literature at Bashanti Devi College. And I asked myself, how did I arrive at this location, you know, a middle-aged professional Bengali woman teaching of all subjects, English literature, to Bengali girls mostly. So my questions took me to Bethune College, and all this was referred to in the previous lecture, which was founded in 1849. And I would also like to add here that it's very important to do these historical excavations. We all need a sense of history, and there are many women in this audience, and I suppose many of us could relate to the founding of a school that was dedicated to the teaching of young girls. There was a lot of controversy over it, and it was not at all an easy task to accomplish. So history is very important. Virginia Woolf goes in search of women authors of the past when she finds hardly any books by British women in the British Library. Alice Walker traces her artistic genealogy to jazz singers and to women who told stories in the kitchen and to her own mother who created beautiful gardens. So there are 4 women that I talk about in my book. They are Kailash Bashini Devi, who wrote Hindu Mohila Ganer Hinabasta, which would translate into English as the degraded state of Hindu women. And she is the first published writer a woman writer in Bengali, and the date is 1862. Some put it down to 1863. And Kailash Bashini was extremely fortunate. She was Brahmo. You see, we have to accept the fact that the Brahmos were the forerunners of reform and reform for women's education in this city. Ram Mohan Roy's founding of the Brahmo Samaj in 1828, and Dwarkanath Ganguly was referred to in the previous session. Dwarkanath was a member of Young Bengal, the group that was formed under Henry Louis Vivian de Rosio when Hindu College was founded in 1817. And de Rosio taught according to, he emphasized rationality as a very important tenet, let's say, of arriving at knowledge. Anyway, so Dwarkanath Ganguly was also a member of Young Bengal, and he worked, Kadumbini comes into his life later. He worked tirelessly for the upliftment of women's situations. So we have Kailash Bashini, who was Brahmo, and who was taught at home by her husband, Durgacharan Gupta. The next writer is Rashu Sundari Devi. She was not from Kolkata, but she was from East Bengal. And she was a zamindar's wife, and she had 13 children. And she desperately wanted to read. And she's very adorable, actually, the most adorable of the 4 women I write about. Because she constantly, God is her, the male protagonist in her text is God. And so, she asks God for everything, and she importunes him for a chance to read, to learn how to read. The other writers is Krishna Bhamini Das. There was reference to Obula Bushu in the previous session, but Krishna Bhamini Das is the first Bengali woman travelogue writer, Inglande Bongo Mohila, which has been translated by Nabonita Sengupta into a Bengali woman in England. And her book was published in 1885. And the last writer that I address is Noti Binodini, or the actress Binodini Dasi. She writes an autobiography, Amar Kotha. So the 4 genres that these women use or are autobiography, polemical writing, and travelogue writing. My point in this book, my let's say, theoretical intervention is 2-pointed. One is that if you suddenly introduce a very unfamiliar verb into a sentence, then the meaning of the sentence goes awry. So the arrival of the woman writer at that time in the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century, disrupted the, what would I say, the cultural syntax of the time, meaning that there was a certain kind of narrative about society, about how things were, and then suddenly you have this woman writer, you have these women writers who are, you know, raising questions, claiming their voices, and so on. And the second point is that for these women who claimed the pen as simultaneously with claiming the pen, they claimed their voices, claimed their agencies, and not only was that a dramatic moment, but it was also a romantic moment. So not as in love between man and man or any other form. It was a romance with language. Romance of freedom that language brings. You know, when ex-slaves wrote the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, ex-slave, written by himself. So language brings power, autonomy, and you are able to claim your voice in a more or less resonant manner.
That's so beautiful. I love the title of your book, Romancing the Word. And, you know, these four women really were scriptwriters of their own history, which I read in one of the reviews about the book. And that really is very sort of moving and very... it was a very iconic thing to do in those days.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for documenting this so well. We'll now move on to Devasis's book, Harry Hobbs of Kolkata and Other Forgotten Lives. And I was absolutely riveted to this book when I picked it up a few weeks ago. And it really uncovered a lot of stories that have run parallel to some of the stories I've been attempting to tell as I walk the streets of this vibrant city with my guests. I invite you to just talk a little bit about your journey from a corporate man in PR and advertising to a lover of storytelling. And this is the second book that you've written.
That's right.
And how you've moved from a sort of a more fictional genre to this sort of non-fiction. But at the same time, a lot of interesting anecdotes that come out, and also the meticulous research that you've done from private memoirs and newspaper articles and things like that. So I'll allow you to just introduce some of that, and then I'd love to read that little excerpt by Harry Hobbs that really exemplifies why people fell in love with the city. And I have fallen in love with it now. Harry Hobbs fell in love with it many years ago.
So what you can do is you can read that. That will set the tone.
Sure. Okay, let me go ahead with that. So Harry Hobbs was a 19-year-old boy who decided to cross the oceans to come around the world to India. He was born in 1864, and when he was 19 years old, he got onto a ship and he sailed off to Calcutta. And this is what he wrote, and it really did move me. He said, "For as long as I can remember, I had romantic ideas about India and always wanted to come here. I have often said that if there is any truth in the theory of a former existence, I was an Indian when on earth before. As I remember quite well, the day I landed in Calcutta, walking into my windowless room in number 5 Crooked Lane, throwing my port side topi on the bed, and in a feeling of profound contentment saying, 'This is all right.' And I have some pleasure in adding that I have never once grumbled about the country since." Now, he arrived here when he was 19. He lived at the same house until he was 92 years old. Can you imagine? And he died in 1956. So not only did he arrive as a piano tuner, he also chronicled the city. And I would love to invite you to share a little bit more about him and the other people in your book.
Thank you. Thank you, Husna-Tara. But before I begin, I would like to thank Anjum, AKLF, the Apeejay group, and Oxford Bookstore for inviting me here. I'm a non-academic. 40 years of my life, I have worked in advertising and PR. Okay? I'm not very educated. I'm a plain and simple graduate in commerce from Calcutta University, Kolkata University. Okay? Till my graduation, I didn't study. I was busy playing Pada Ka Dada, Mastan, Rajniti, Mada Madi, Hey, Deke Nobo. But then what happens after my graduation, when I got into the real world, I got married very early. Now I had to feed, instead of me, I have to also feed a family. Baba bolle bhai, jao, bujhe now. So when I went into the situation of a bujhe now, then I've understood koto dhane, koto chal. So that's when my lekha padashona, my study started. Now today's topic is the vibrant city. The hero or the heroine of the topic is the city. This city, Kolkata, Calcutta, Kolkata, this has given me immense understanding and knowledge. And writing this book is my way of giving back to the city. Now, a lot of people, I'm a contrarian in principle. Basically, I'm a contrarian, okay? I'm sure you are aware of the term contrarian. The point is, this city is not a Bengali city. It's my conviction. This is a cosmopolitan city. This city has been made by Bengalis, by the colonial rulers. Now, in some sessions I've been seeing, oh, this is a colonial building. So what? That building was there, that building had a history, that building has added to the character of the city. Well, between 25th of December and 1st of January, we all know what happens to the Park Street. That's a Christian festival. Then why are we celebrating it? Because we are Calcuttans. So here we have Hindus, we have Muslims, we have Christians, we have Jains, we have Buddhists, and that's what made this city so interesting. I will just simply take you back. I was born about a decade after India became independent. The year is 1957. In any way, I'm 68 years old, so what? So what has happened, my Pishima, my auntie, used to stay in North Calcutta, and we used to stay in South Calcutta. So we will get into a 2B or a 2-number double-decker bus. Unfortunately, that's stopped in 2005, but back then it was there, and it was prior to the Indo-Pak War. That means prior to 1965. Firpos was in full swing. Lido room was there. You know, a lot of people remember Firpo of my generation because Miss Sifali used to do cabaret there. There's no good or bad, that's Calcutta. That's created the characteristics of Calcutta. Now, one as a young kid of 7 or 8 years, sitting on the top deck of the 2B bus, I passed Elgin Road and then get into the Maidan and then past the Firpos. There are a waft of music that comes in from the Firpos. You know, it remained in my conscience. It remained in my sense. So as I grew up, and I was fortunate enough because I worked in an organization called Shaw Wallace where I met a lot of people and all that. I met two very interesting people from this city. One of them is a Malayali. His name is Parameshwaran Thankappan Nair. Unfortunately, that gentleman died a couple of months ago. But I've been fortunate enough for nearly 3 years, sit into his small 2-room apartment and live through his books. And I had another gentleman who was my teacher when I was doing my post-graduation, when I got the dhakka to study public relations and advertising, and that was Shatulda, Radha Prasad Gupta. Now, these two gentlemen, iconic gentlemen, and their association, I fell in love with Calcutta. We are talking about vibrant city today. If you remember, I mean, very many of you were not born when Kolkata was called Khurchimati Deghbi Aaye, CMDA. You know, when the metro rail was happening and all that. Now, so people were very averse to that. For 10, 15 years, we were angry. What's happening? I can't leave, I can't go, there is dust, the traffic congested and everything. Then they said, Kolkata ekdin to kollolini tilottama hobe. That Calcutta will become vibrant and vivacious. But here we are talking about 19th century Calcutta being a vibrant city. Calcutta has always been vibrant, always. So my journey was to find that vibrancy. And when I started trying to find that vibrancy, now as a writer I found a small niche for myself. Everybody wants to have a USP. Now everybody is writing about Bengal Renaissance, we are writing about the Bengalis, but there were enormous amount of people. Unfortunately, I have concentrated this mostly on Europeans and American settlers. There is a huge Marwari community. They have done great service to this city. You know, Mr. Sanjeev Goenka, his father was R.P. Goenka. His father was Hariram Goenka. Now, Mr. Hariram Goenka was the councillor of the Barabazar constituency. How many of you know? When he had a small gaddi in Amratala Road, he was a councillor. Now, from there, today, one of the monoliths, the big corporates, they have contributed to the city. So when we talk about vibrant city, it's not only the Bengalis. Everybody has contributed. And my journey in this book is to find out those 9 Caucasians who have not only contributed, they mostly stayed in this city. Once they came in here, they fell in love and they have not left the city. One of them being Harry Hobbs. If you look at it, Esplanade East, Keshi Dasher Dokan, Mishtit Dokan, exactly 6 buildings down the street, there is 4 Esplanade Row East. That's now the office of DGFT. Harry Hobbs stayed in that building for 73 years. He wrote 18 books on Calcutta. Can you think of it? And when I went this time to National Library to research on him, primarily for last 30 years, I was not in Calcutta. I was not in Kolkata. I was a Torontian from Calcutta, but I came back and to write this book. In this century, that means in last 25 years, none of Harry Hobbs's books were issued. Nobody went and searched for Harry Hobbs. But my dear sirs, ladies and gentlemen, if you go and read Harry Hobbs, you will be amazed. I have discovered only 10% of him and have been able to write a book. If you discover him, you will be writing 20 books. These were the kind of people who made Calcutta. So I will talk about it later. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So just because of the paucity of time, I'm going to just mention some of the other characters in your book, just to tease the audience with what they have to come once they buy this book. Richard Reed was the first detective crime writer who discovered evidence photography. David Carson was a comic star. Henry Prinsep was a reluctant lawmaker. And Shirley Tremaine was the founder of the first business and financial newspaper that
in Calcutta,
was
yes,
the precursor
Capital.
to the Economic Times today and the Financial Review and things like that. So these are just 4 of them. I had the pleasure of meeting William Dalrymple before this session, and he was very excited to see your book because he said he's related to 3 of the chapters of your book. The
That's
Shakespeare
right.
family who had sentence
The
here. There
Princeps
was the Princeps
and
as
the
well.
Dilai Tang and
Yes.
the Patel.
Who was the spurned lover of Marie Antoinette, the
That's
last
right.
queen of France, right?
That's
So
right.
those are the kind of stories you'll find in the book, right? Now, I'm going to briefly come back to Sreemati as well. So the women you talk about really exemplify how the voices challenged societal norms at the time and also served to criticize the social structure of the time. Now, remember, these are very different books in a sense. One is a sort of light-hearted review with a lot of detail of these European characters, and yours is a very deep, emotional review of these women that challenged societal norms that really did affect their lives, their children, their husbands, their futures. It was a very, very emotional and a sensitive time for many of them. And I was especially moved by the travel writer Krishna Bhabani, who compares English and Bengali women at the time. And she writes so beautifully, objectively, yet sensitively about the similarities and the differences, and also about things like her idea of feminists, the feminist movement, but also being a feminist, the feminism that had to come from a Bengali lady that wanted to break free, but was perhaps held back by the society that she was living in, the husbands that supported some of these women and allowed them to travel, allowed them to write. So could you elaborate a little bit more about some of the stories that you've touched upon in your book that talk about breaking these societal norms at the time?
About breaking societal norms? Is that
Yes,
what you'd like me
so.
to
Or whatever
emphasize
you'd
on?
like to pick up on. Whatever you'd like
Okay.
to pick up on.
Hasna wants me to talk about Krishna Bhabini, so I'll do that. She's the author of Inglande Bongo Mohila. So, you see, I don't know how much awareness they had of being disruptive or challenging. I mean, perhaps Kailash Bashini did, and I'd like to mention in this context that the 19th century was not a time when people acknowledged their sources. I mean, even T.S. Eliot doesn't do it. So, and even Rabindranath doesn't, you know, I mean, songs that he's borrowed from Hindustani classical bandishes, he never acknowledges them. Later research has unearthed his sources. So Kailash Bashini doesn't, but I found direct echoes of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. That was the first feminist interrogation of culture. Why won't women be given education? That's her pivotal question. Because not having education makes women almost like animals, and it breeds corruption in society because their husbands tire of their beauty and their, they aim at being beautiful and fashionable and smart. And these are superficial things, so unless they develop their minds, their husbands won't be interested and they'll all get involved in extramarital affairs. She actually says all this and says that the lack of education in women is creating corruption in society. So Kailash Bashini asks very similar questions. She starts with, why won't Bengali girls have education? Why is it that their brothers have education and they don't? Asha Purna Devi asks the same question in her feminist trilogy, Pratham Pratisruti, Suparnalata, etc. So I'd like to acknowledge what I thought was the voice of Mary Wollstonecraft in Kailash Bashini. Now, you see, personally speaking, I mean, I'm the mother of 2 children. I got married very early, and my journey up to this point here at the Apeejay Literary Festival has been one of tremendous struggle, you know. What's kept me going is my passion for academics and learning. So I guess all these women had that. Krishna Bhamini wanted to see England. There was a real eros, you know. I mean, England, Bengalis fantasized about. I'm going to talk about Bengalis because all 4 of my authors are Bengalis. And at that time, it was very Bengali, second half of the 19th century. So she wanted to see England. But let me tell you what the price of her decision is. Her father-in-law was Sreenath Das, and he was a close associate of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who was instrumental in passing the Widow Remarriage Act in 1856. So Sreenath Das, her father-in-law, supported Vidyasagar in the world outside. But when his own son, his older son, got married to a widow, he excommunicated him. So talk about, men were allowed to get away with these double standards for ever and ever. I'm sorry I'm putting it out there like that. So Devasis can jump in and say something. I mean, he can do that. Okay. Well, now what did Sreenath Das do? When Krishna Bhavini said her husband used to teach in England. I mean, he couldn't become a barrister, so he used to teach in 3 colleges, and he did not really like coming back. So when he goes back in 1882, Krishna Bhavini accompanies him. And the price of that decision was that her father-in-law said, you can't take your daughter with you. How old was the daughter? 5 years old. Tilottama. And when Krishna Bhamini comes back in she was there for 7 years, so 1889, I think. unless I'm making some mistake with dates, Tilottama had died by then. And you have poems that Tilottama has written accusing her mother. I mean, what was my fault that you left me behind? So when Krishnabhamini published her book, the book was published in 1885, so I'm having, I suppose, some problem with dates here, because some sources say that she stayed in England for 10 years, but what I remember is 7 years, so 1882 to 1889.
And her father-in-law also married her daughter off at the age of 11,
yes,
which was
yes. That's
sort of
right.
a double thing. So his son he had ostracized, and then his granddaughter, you know, he married her off as a child bride, and then she died, which was tragic.
She died in her father-in-law's house. I mean, her mother was not there. So that's the price that women often have had to pay for their extraordinary decisions. And when Krishnabhamini's book was published in 1885, she ensured that Tilottama's poems be appended to her book. Now, a little bit about what she writes. I want to say that not only did she leave the Ondur Mahal, or the zenana of her house, she also crossed the Kalapani. You know, there were great taboos, there were a lot of prohibitions against travel overseas, loss of caste, loss of race, loss of purity, etc., etc. She was not Brahmo, but she was Hindu. So she was able to reject all these superstitions. She went to England, and we have to remember that there were many British women who wrote about India, like Martha Graham, Eliza Fay, Fanny Parks. But their gaze, or, you know, they were members of the colonizing race, and they walked about with confidence. And Krishnabhamini was a member of the subject race who went to the imperial center. But she uses language very confidently. She keeps all personal references out of her more or less sociological analysis. And she says that the strengths of the English character are that they are extremely hardworking, enterprising, and extremely hardworking, and that they are technologically very adept. And she says they won't spare, they'll do anything to earn money. Money is what they love. And she also, does denigrate, yes, that would be the right word, their alcoholism or their extreme fondness for alcohol. Now, we have to remember that starting with Mary Wollstonecraft in 1792, there was a real progression in England on the question of women's rights. I mean, women get the vote around the middle of the 20th century in England. 26, 27, around that time. So there was a real women's movement in Europe, in England, when Krishnabhamini was there. And we see this pained, this anguish, not in her writing, not in the prose that she writes, but in poems. There's like one major poem she writes in the text, where she keeps asking, "Oh, Mother India," or "Oh, Mother Bengal, when will our girls, when will my sisters have the kind of freedom that English women seem to enjoy?" And she says marriage is not the end all and the be all for English women. If they don't, yes, they like to get married. Yes, English women do hunt for husbands. She says all that. But then if they don't, then they don't languish with grief. They work, they take up social causes, they teach, they write. So she really celebrates their independence. And she tells her reader, she says, "Pathika gone." So she really aims at a female readership. And she says that, "I was as imprisoned as you were. I so wish that you could enjoy the kind of freedom I'm enjoying." Shall I say a few words about Binodini?
Yeah,
No,
the time's up. so
Oh, okay.
we'll have to
All
end
right.
here. Yeah. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, there is so much more we could talk about. Yesterday, when the three of us met for tea, we actually talked for 2.5 hours, and it was so engaging. But I mean, one of my favorite quotes about women that came almost 100 years after all this happened was from Begum Rokeya when she was talking at the Women's Educational Conference in 1921, and her famous quote, of course, was, "If men are not led astray once educated, why should women?" And I think that really does sum up how women's education should be talked about. I'm sorry we didn't have time for any closing words from you, Devasis, but I think the reading of the stories in his book will really bring a side of Calcutta alive that many of you will be quite intrigued by. So if there's anything you'd like to close with, and maybe a little tantalizing anecdote, a short one, to just end the session.
That will be a 2-page reading. Will that be all right?
No. A half-page reading or a quick anecdote, just
No.
a little.
Think of a situation if the official language of India would have been Farsi or Sanskrit. Would India have been the same? Think of it. When we talk about colonialism, yes, there is an adverse side to it, but there is a beneficial side to it as well. So endless confrontation does not bring resolution. We need to de-escalate at some point of time. And while we de-escalate, we need to be sensitive to everything. We need to be sensitive that what the other race, other side, other men and women, and everybody is talking. Now, the 19th century Calcutta, there was a relationship of being a conquered and a conquest. But then, well, that's life. How do we can stay peacefully? How can we grow peacefully? How can we learn? I think the vibrant city, the Calcutta, teaches us that. We need to remember that. I think in the entire India, there's much, I've traveled all over the world practically, but there's much less confrontation in this city. That's what makes this a vibrant city. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, AKLF, and it's been a privilege to moderate this session. And do read the books. They're absolutely amazing. Thank you very much.